KO.
Black is beautiful. Yes, it is. Black is beautiful. Black is beautiful. Yes, it is. Black is beautiful. Come on.
No Justice, No Peace. I'm Atalia.
I'm Donnie.
I'm Sierra.
I'm Janelle.
And I'm Kalia.
And welcome to No Justice, No Peace, The Take. As a starting point, we would love to thank those who have watched and followed along with the podcast, all the way from Your Independence is Not Ours to our current series in which we are excited to announce The Color Lines of COVID.
Before we kickstart the next phase of KJKP, we would like to acknowledge the energy, work, and dedication from our former co-host, Alana Mitchell. As one of the founders and a vital part of the No Justice, No Peace podcast team, we would like to express our gratitude and appreciation for her.
We are super proud of you, Alana, and your KJKP family here is wishing you lots of love and luck at your UCCS and positively the rest of your future.
All right, so before we get into it, let's all give ourselves a pat on the back for getting through the 2021 to 2022 school year. Clearly, it's been a while since you've seen all of us together, but hey, we're back and we have so much in store for y'all.
As I mentioned earlier, we are proud to be introducing our third series called The Color Lines of COVID. Not only is COVID a lethal respiratory disease, but it has also revealed and exacerbated inequities and racial discrimination across the globe.
We know that the pandemic has created a drastic change in every aspect of our lives. COVID has induced ongoing struggles at home, in school, at work, and from personal, spiritual, and mental aspects of our lives. It's been especially hard for families, friends, and community members who have lost loved ones to vigorous battles with COVID.
Knowing how this pandemic has drastically and disproportionately affected our Black and Brown communities, let's face it, it has been a very vulnerable time for all of us.
We didn't come back the same, and that's the title of this episode. Today, we'll be acknowledging the added adversity and struggle that COVID brought forth. From day one, students of color added disadvantage in their educational journey. A predicament like COVID-19 only adds fuel to the fire of racial injustice currently plaguing our society. The world has changed, students' minds have changed, therefore the system must change.
Today, we will be speaking with a variety of voices. We have representation from the district leadership, Dr. Jane Lineman, who is the DPS Student Safety Coordinator. We have our own DMLK mental health team, Cyndi Hawkins, our very own social worker, and Felicia Hawkins, our amazing DMLK nurse. We also have one of our best and most passionate teachers, Miss Bruce, who teaches American government and debate. And last but certainly not least, a high school student who is also a member of DMLK SoCo, Karina Lupian-Saucedo.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on The Take today. It's exciting to have true representation and voice from all stakeholders in DPS. I know I'm ready for this conversation, but before we get started, we must remind our listeners of our trigger alert. Donnie, can you please read the trigger alert?
Yeah. If you are not 110% in support of Black Lives Matter, please dismiss yourself. If you are in any sort of agreement with the systematic oppressions this country has inflicted on minorities, once again, please dismiss yourself. And if you are not willing to give every bit of the power that the people so undeniably deserve, then please dismiss yourself. Because in a few moments, you'll witness vast amounts of Black engagement. And if you do not dismiss yourself, then the thoughts, facts, and feelings we are about to share will most definitely dismiss you.
Okay, so before we get into this episode, we always like for our guests to introduce themselves. In a minute or less, tell us a little bit about you and your profession. This really helps our audience get tapped in.
My name is Karina Lupian-Saucedo. I am a student at DMLK, and I am a part of a group called DMLK SoCo.
My name is Cyndi Hawkins. I am a school social worker here at DMLK. I've been in the mental health field for the past 7 years. I've worked with adolescents, adults, the elderly, and I've been at DMLK for 3 years. I am a proud Montbello High School alumni. I love the community, and thank you guys for having me.
Good morning, everyone. I am Felicia Hawkins, a school nurse for DMLK. I am a wife, a mother, a military veteran, and a resilient Black woman. I've been a nurse for about 16 years now, and 6 of those years I've been at DMOK, and I've pretty much loved every moment of it, the good and the bad that we've had. Also, I'm a nationally certified school nurse, and currently I'm in school to be a nurse practitioner to further what I can do for everyone. And thank you for having me.
My name is Rachel Bruce. I am a graduate of the Denver Public Schools. So was my brother, and I sent my daughter to the Denver Public Schools. I've been here at MLK since 2005. I helped start the high school. I'm a coach of the debate team, and I teach American government and international relations.
Dr. Jane Lineman, I am a school psychologist. It is my 15th year with Denver Public Schools. I have been currently supporting as a student safety coordinator, so I help support student safety needs such as non-suicidal self-injury, suicide prevention, our threat response process, and then of course our crisis recovery supports that we provide to schools. Love Denver Public Schools. Consider it probably my forever home for profession, and super excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you all for sharing with our audience about yourselves, because I love the variety we have so that we have so many different perspectives on the topics we're going to be talking about today.
Yep, I definitely remember back in like March of 2020, it was like people knew about COVID, but it was mainly a joke in most cases when people talked about it. And I feel like that was because no one really knew how significant and how big it was going to impact all of us.
Yeah, I will never forget like the last day of school, I believe was on March 13th, when a lot of students were, including myself, were very excited when we heard we were getting an extended spring break. But more and more weeks kept getting added on till they just came to the conclusion that we would be out of school, not returning to in-person for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I remember like balancing my personal life, my school life, sports. It was really hectic during that time. So when I heard about the extended break, I couldn't complain.
Honestly, I don't think anyone was complaining at the time. I know I definitely wasn't. I feel like everyone really needed a break at that point.
I know for me personally, it took about a month on break and a couple of weeks of virtual learning before staying at home became really annoying for me. Having to constantly sit at home with all the worldly dysfunction going on really began weighing down on my mental health. And now, as a 21 graduate, looking back on my last years of high school, I always knew I wouldn't have like a High School Musical kind of education experience, but I never thought I'd be trying to grasp my future through a computer screen.
I agree. And I will admit that at the end of my freshman year, it was a bit of a mess because students weren't really used to joining classes on Zoom and Google Meets. And teachers were still adjusting to teaching through technology. And no one really knew how things were going to go down in the long run.
I also feel like there is a lot of students that were mentally checked out of school just because there is this lack of direction and really communication with us as individuals and at the beginning of virtual learning. And consequently, a lot of our education ended up being lost more often than our internet connection.
I definitely see what you're saying, Donnie. And I think that now that people are back in schools, it's pretty clear that remote learning has caused some anxiety, depression, confusion, and a loss of self and emotional awareness. Like Donnie mentioned, this is among the countless learning opportunities students have been deprived of, especially for Black, Hispanic, Asian, and Indigenous communities. Like we said, many students lost loved ones not only to COVID, but also to an uproar of hurt, anger, and violence in our community.
Routinely, studies have shown students of color to be more adversely affected academically than non-students of color. I was just reading an article on McKinsey.com, and it claims that after COVID, students of color would be 6 to 12 months behind, compared with 4 to 8 months for white students. 6 to 12 months, on top of the lack of education that we had going into COVID.
There is no question that students of color, and especially students from low-income schools, are receiving the short end of the stick. And it can be hard when you're already behind and you're already discouraged in class, and COVID just comes along, and then you fall further behind, and you find it much harder to catch up. And in result, students tend to drop out and discontinue their education.
And that is completely true in many circumstances. There's actually evidence about dropout rates from CNN, and it's claiming that there's a sharp decline in attendance, there's a rising number in failing grades, there's decreasing enrollment, and that those who have really been affected by the pandemic are the ones who have been underserved before the pandemic, essentially poor students and students of color.
And in order to really ensure that the system is functioning, schools across the country reintroduced in-person learning. Despite being unprepared to create culturally relevant learning environments that can actually be safe zones for students experiencing trauma and hardship.
I definitely see what you're saying, Donnie, and I think the system is still working exactly how it was designed. I was reading an article called COVID-19 and Learning Loss. Disparities grow and students need help. The article proves that while all students are suffering, those who came into the pandemic with the fewest academic opportunities are on track to exit with the greatest learning loss.
Realizing that the originally underserved students received worse education after the pandemic, this led our district leaders to begin thinking about how to make their buildings become a more safer and advantageous environment for students. However, due to the uncertainty in the whole world, we realized that obviously there wasn't really enough time to execute it in full effect.
Right. And when schools opened, it was very clear that the district wasn't fully prepared to welcome faculty back and much less train them how to really welcome us back as students.
And when we talk about it, the pre-pandemic in regards to the statistics referring to disparities that students of color face, I think it's time to really focus on talking about post-pandemic. Even though we're still in the pandemic, we need to talk about strategies to help us right now that ensure we're all reaching our full potential.
So after protests, quarantine, mental exhaustion, death of loved ones, unstable home environments, among other various aspects of remote learning, I'm sure I can say not one person came back the same. So let me see, raise your hand if you came back the same. All right, I think my point's proven.
Okay, now let's get some other voices in the room. I am curious to hear the opinion of our guests. Ms. Bruce, what are some of the thoughts you have about remote learning and the pandemic?
Well, one of the things that I think about is just trauma. Trauma is trauma, no matter how bad it is for any given person. And so for some people, some of our students, there was seriously extreme trauma if they had family members who were hospitalized, if they had family members who died. So you have people dealing with severe grief coming back. Other trauma might be just a family pivot. If the parents lost jobs and then the teenagers had to then become wage earners, that's a trauma too. And then there's another type of just pure boredom of being in your house and just watching things on Zoom meetings, trying to learn something. So there's this big variety of trauma. Secondly, there's a change in the instructional. Instructionally, you're used to human contact, and now there's tech to tech contact, and that just doesn't work for a lot of people. So those are the two things that really come to mind for me, is the trauma people experienced and the significant shift in instruction.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's like so many different things that have changed, and like coming back to like an environment that hasn't changed and it's the exact same, it's pretty hard to adapt to. So I want to know what you also think about this, Ms. Hawks.
Thank you. Yeah, just kind of piggyback on what Ms. Bruce said, just kind of the trauma. And then we think about the structure and the consistency that our students are used to. And then being in that home environment, it just wasn't the same. We've had parents who've had multiple children, some kids didn't have the proper resources that we needed, even working with students who are on IEPs and 504 plans, how accommodations wasn't even getting met through remote learning. Even with us, mental health, it was a struggle to even connect because we didn't have a safe place to meet with our students when they're in a room full of parents or peers, where they didn't just have that safe place to just meet with us and really talk. So it was definitely a lot, and it was definitely hard.
I totally agree, because I can definitely see how someone isn't willing to open up because they have this pressure because of the environment they're in. And so like when you're in school, it's different because you don't have these kind of pressures around you. I totally get that. I want to hear from Karina. Do you want to like add on to anything?
Yeah, I think that a lot of students did lose like a year and a half worth of learning environment. Personally, I couldn't focus at home because for me to be able to learn, I have to be in a live classroom. And with big families, I feel like if you will share a room with a sibling, it would be really hard to even like have a safe space to talk to someone, to counselors. And it could have really affected mental health because we couldn't go anywhere. We could only do it on calls. And being able to come back after a year and a half online, I feel like a lot of students don't know what to do in this case because it feels like they just skipped a year and a half ahead and they still have that mind, like eighth graders, seventh graders, or freshmen still have the minds of a freshman.
Yeah, like it's different when you've been in this environment for like over a year and then you have to come back to school and you have to like try to insert yourself into society like everything's normal again. And it kind of leads into my next question. So I know before the beginning of each school year, school staff receive training to prepare for the upcoming school year. And I want to know, Ms. Hawkins, as a school nurse, did you receive any training or professional development that prepared you for this current year?
Thank you. I would say very little. Of course, I anticipated that there was going to be a lot of needs. And of course, keeping up with everything that's going on in the world, just realizing for myself how it was going to impact what I do. Coming back, definitely, I wish that we had had more, and I wish that there was more thought put into how we came back, with our kids, because we already knew that you guys were, at home. It was difficult, it was challenging, and just so many things that everyone has had to deal with. And to me, it just seems like the thought was just not really there, not deeply, and we're trying to figure it out as we go. And I don't think, of course, that is the best approach. I get it. We're trying to put people in seats, but that's just not going to cut it, because we have to deal with, one, the mental health, the health, and just really debrief each other on what we all have gone through. And I don't think we have sat and taken the time to do that. And until we do that, we're not going to get to learning and education, not the way that we want to.
Ms. Hawkins, I'm definitely glad you said that. It kind of goes into what I was mentioning earlier about how really the district didn't really prepare anyone to be welcomed back into this learning environment for both staff and students as well. And it kind of goes into what Talia was saying when I was also very curious about what did that training look like for you, considering that we did return to school in person and it's a dramatic change for everybody. I just want to know, during the pandemic, when most students and some faculty members were not vaccinated, how did that look coming back to school?
As a nurse, I'll tell you, I'm heightened, and I'm sure a lot of the staff members themselves, as I've heard, they were scared. We are all scared because this is a novel virus. And so we don't know what it's going to look like tomorrow. And, as I said earlier, I think we were moving too fast, and we really didn't take a deep breath to figure out what we need to do to be as effective as we need to be. Yes, it's okay, it's good. Definitely, school is a safe place for us and for our students to be, but we want to make sure that we're making that as effective for them as possible. And, we're seeing now with the new variant that we have going, that puts even more stress. My job has changed from, which was already, my plate was already completely full, to now I have another job with COVID, and pretty much that's what I do all day is COVID stuff. And I'm gonna tell you, I'm to the point where I'm tired of it. And I really feel like the district needs to do more as far as delving into and not just making decisions without talking to those who are actually doing the work.
Thank you for sharing that. And Dr. Lineman,
Yeah.
please feel free to unmute and share as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to echo what Ms. Hawkins had shared in terms of the fear. I think there were a lot of people scared. And I think there continues to be a lot of fear. I hear people say, well, after the pandemic, and I always go, pause, like we're still in the pandemic. I don't know why we're so quick to think that we're over it. It's not over, it's still happening. Several people are impacted. But I also recognize none of us have experienced this before. There was no roadmap. There was nothing to say, oh, do X, Y, or Z, and we will find success. And everyone's doing their absolute best. I think our youth are doing their best to figure out like how to balance what their needs are, what's going on at home, what's going on at school. I think our staff are doing their best to figure out like what can we do to support our kids, but what can we also do to support our adults? Because if our adults aren't in a good place, we're not going to do great work for our kids. In terms of training, I think that's a great question for human resources, right? They oversee training for the district, but I can tell you, at least within the area of mental health for school psychologists and school social works, we really try to ground ourselves around what resources are available for grief and how can we bring those resources into our buildings? How can we better identify how to meet kids with where they're at if they're at risk for harm to themselves or harm to someone else, and help them find the care and treatment, because right now our resources in schools are stretched thin. They're also stretched thin in our community. So you're seeing what I perceive kind of to be a reactive response, not only in our schools, but around in our communities too, because we're low on capacity. And again, no one had a roadmap. So we're all trying to figure it out. And I'm going to echo what Ms. Hawkins said, like we need to give the time and attention to really identify like what can work, because there's no prior game plan to tell us what's going to work. So now is the time to really listen and ask. And it's kind of like you said, how do we ask our people in buildings? How do we ask our youth? How do we talk to our families? I know we've done a number of surveys to try to get a better handle on what the needs are and what people can access. But I'm not sure we all know what we need right now. I think sometimes we're still trying to process through like what we're feeling and what's going on. I don't know if that's helpful, but some of my 2 cents.
No, it definitely was helpful, and I understand completely. I know that me personally, I was scared to come back too, and maybe not even for myself, but like if I go back to school and bring something back to my family, like that's always a possibility. And I also really liked what you said when it comes to time and attention. I think that we could really just use the time and put our attention towards talking to each other. And even if we don't all know what we need at the moment, at least we could talk about what we could possibly need. So yeah, and after coming back from remote learning, I've heard from so many students that they were discouraged, and the intensity from their classes and the lack of understanding from their teachers caused that. And I remember before the pandemic, everyone was so social and willing to make connections with everybody. But now I can see that many of my classmates really prefer to stay to themselves. And I've seen our interactions lower significantly. And I think that that shows that many students have been pretty traumatized throughout this experience, and it's affecting us in social settings.
And speaking of social settings, I know that a lot of students will say that their teachers have been able to help them through a lot of their trauma, a lot of their hardships. And knowing that, Ms. Bruce, you've been here with our students for over 10 years, you've made peer connections with so many of our students and had a lot of day-to-day interactions with them. As a vital part of the Panther family, what do you think have been key signs of decrease in motivation from our students when coming back from virtual learning?
That's a really good question. And I want to caveat what I'm saying by saying I don't want to blame any of the students or say that I'm disappointed in the students. I'm just trying to say objectively what I've seen. One sign is just almost an unwillingness to reconnect. So during remote learning, there were so many opportunities for students to disconnect from their learning. One example is like turning off your cameras or not participating in discussion. And so now you've come back from that, and the teachers were so hopeful that things could get reconnected really quickly, and they haven't. So that's one of the signs. You have students still not participating. You have students still not really interacting with the teachers. And of course, you have cell phones of the students just preferring to just stay in their own little bubble. So that's one sign, is a inability or a reluctance to reconnect. A second sign that I've seen is sort of being academically overwhelmed, because here at DMLK, the students were down to 3 or 4 classes to manage, and now they're back up to 7 classes to manage. And so a sign I see is just students feeling academically overwhelmed. Another sign I see is a difference in the pace or the urgency of wanting to do work. And I think that the reason for that was that back during remote learning, you'd go through the class, you'd click off the camera, click off the class, and then you could go do the work whenever you wanted. And so now when we've come back and a teacher has maybe blocked out 15 or 20 minutes to get to work, I see a sign of students not doing that, of just like turning off and saying, okay, I'm ready to go to my next class. And so I see some of that urgency and the pace is off kilter. And then I think the last sign I'm seeing, and I don't have any proof for this, is that I don't think students are identifying themselves as students anymore. I think that during the pandemic, they were really re-identifying as family members, as sons and daughters who are like connected with their family and have things to do. And I think that coming back and saying, okay, here I am in my secondary school and I have a job to do, and my job is to get educated and to prepare myself. I just don't see that there's that light in their eyes anymore. And that worries me very much. So those are the signs I see.
I would like to really say, Ms. Bruce, I resonated with so much of the stuff that you said. Like, it's really crazy. I feel like a lot of it had to do with like our environments, knowing that one, school wasn't something that all students really looked toward and forward to before the pandemic. There were some students, but then going into your home environment and being there, and then knowing that school is really just through technology, and then how we look at technology, how much of our life is influenced by social media. Like, you can choose to pick up your phone right now, or you can choose to look at this screen and pay attention to whatever your teacher is saying, regardless of if you think it's important to you or not. And speaking of importance, it's like when you're in a home environment like that, and what you said about just becoming a family member, like really losing your identity as a person that's growing up and going to go out into the world. One, I think a lot of students lost reality of what they think the world even is going to be, because I know for me, I graduated during that. And just like the class before me, we went out into the world not really knowing what it was going to be, but we were in school. So then COVID came, and that changed a lot. Like, we didn't go to prom. We didn't, things were so different, and losing that identity, knowing like, I just want to work so that I can have money, so I can support myself, because I don't know what my parents are going to be able to do for me. Like, it distracted us and pulled us away from school a lot. So I definitely can see how coming back into the classroom, we, like teachers and students, are seeing that and being affected by that experience.
And I just really want to piggyback off of what Janelle said, because I really just totally loved what you said, because coming from a teacher perspective, and I know myself, I speak to a lot of students as well, and we talk about the lack of motivation and just not wanting to do the work coming back, and just knowing that teachers really understand, especially you, understand what it's like for a student to come back and how hard it is and how hard it has been. And like just the stress it has been on a student is just really amazing to see. Thank you.
Yeah, and to add on to what Donnie and Janelle said, I was just so excited to jump in. But I know that I think it was really spot on of what you said around all of the signs, because I can say that I personally related to majority, if not all of those signs. And I was laughing a little bit because when you were talking about how like you would give a sense of, or students wouldn't give a sense of urgency anymore to their assignments and not doing work, that was me. It was me, and honestly, until up to break, when I had like a chance to get myself together. But I can only speak for myself when I say that at the beginning of the year, I had no motivation to do my best academically. I was just truly not in the mindset to take school seriously again. And I struggled specifically with turning in assignments on time because I know during the pandemic, like you said, Ms. Bruce, there were barely any deadlines. There wasn't that sense of urgency. So I can say that as time this finally progressed. But Karina, I would love to hear about your experiences throughout the school year and how do you feel about being back?
Honestly, throughout the pandemic and online school, I really did feel like I was in summer for like the longest time ever because I wouldn't do work in school. I would submit a few assignments 2 or 3 months late. And since it was middle school, I knew I was still pass either way, no matter like how bad my grades got. And it really was a draining experience for me to the point where I am now taking therapy for it. And a lot has happened. A few family members have died, not due to COVID, but due to other stuff too. And it really did cause a lot of tension between my family, and I couldn't really get myself to do any work. And I promised myself that once I get into high school, I will start doing work. And since it was like 4 classes with an SEL, it really did feel like when we came back, we extended the hours even more because before COVID, classes used to start at 8:05 and now they start at 7:30 to 2:45. And I feel like it's because we added more and one more class to the school than we did before COVID. And I feel like being back at school, it really did make me more confident because I was a shy person. And throughout the pandemic, I did really receive a lot of confidence to even talk during the classes. And coming back from school, I feel like people are so used to having a mask on, they refuse to take it off until the end of the day. And it really like affects them because most of the students I used to talk to, they just don't want to talk to me anymore. And I get why that the pandemic has affected them and that they just want to be alone.
I just want to emphasize how important everything you said was, because like I know already just getting into this conversation, we were related to a lot of things that have been said, but I'll even say myself, I started going to therapy during the pandemic as well. And what I found was that I was going to therapy because I was stressed in school and because of other issues outside. And then school was making it even more stressful. And I ended up stop going to therapy because there was so much work going around with school. So the same reason I went to therapy was the same reason that I left in the first place. And I feel like I'm really glad that you brought that up because I know a lot of students, when they do have access to mental health resources, the things that they need to get help with are just so big and so beyond what a therapist can do that can really just discourage you to get help in the first place. So I'm just really glad that you brought up the point about getting help with your mental health during the pandemic and how it can affect you and how as students coming back, there are a lot of things that are just different now that really need to be addressed within the districts that students don't have to go out looking for therapists outside of school and maybe taking money out of their own pockets to pay for something that the district should really be taking care of.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge because like I've also related to the fact that I have also lost family members over the pandemic, and it's so hard to just come back, and it's so different because you're dealing with all of these things at home and you're also trying to juggle school. And then when we were learning during the pandemic, you have to have self-motivation in order to do your work and turn it in, and you're thinking about all of these different things. But like I think this has really generated like this kind of effect in our school systems. And so I've noticed that students are less engaged in schools when it comes to participation. And I think that this is due to the fact that in a virtual environment, you're not really compelled to participate, knowing that there's no way that you can truly be held accountable for not doing work. And this is a mindset we've developed and we've brought back into school, and it's like creating this frustration between students and teachers.
Yeah, I think that brings up a great point of how responsible students were for themselves. I feel like we've done a lot of growing personally because we had to vouch for ourselves. We had to make sure we had that self-discipline. It's almost like we grew up faster than what was anticipated because being in a pandemic and being all by ourselves for so long and just having to rock with it. But I agree completely. And Ms. Bruce, since coming back from virtual learning, how have you increased student engagement and maybe motivated students that were feeling discouraged?
Again, that's another good question. I want to point out that there is a minority of students who did excel and did do well under virtual learning, and it was a mode of learning that worked for them. But the majority of students, it did not. And so now you're having students come back after a year and a half of being discouraged and not academically motivated. And that's a real difficult thing. So your question was to me is, what to do. The short answer is build relationships. You got to build relationships so that you can make sure that that student understands that you want them to be successful. So a couple of things. One is that I just think that by saying to the student, I understand how hard this has been. And I think that helps a student realize the teacher is there to help them out. A second thing is to just give students tons of praise. And one thing that I was trying to do is write more individual emails to students and to say, I know that you participated today and that was great. I know that you turned this in on time after turning in so many late assignments. That was great. So just giving a lot of individual praise, which takes a little bit more time, but is so worth it because then you're getting the student more and more motivated. I think adjusting assignments is another thing that can help students be a little bit more motivated. And when I say adjust the assignment, I'm saying make it more real world, make it something that the students are passionate about. I think students have been in a way silenced by the pandemic. And so adjusting assignments so that they can really vent all these things that they've been building up. I think reminding students that Schoology is a tool, that it's something that we really haven't had. And there's so many resources and ways for students to get caught up and to go back and reteach themselves, and learning that in this electronic environment, there's so many resources out there. And then I think one of the last things is to just literally reach out and ask the student, why aren't you motivated? Why are you discouraged? And just having students unload and talk through that can actually help them break through that wall. So those are a couple of things that I've tried.
And I can't say, before you jump in really quick, Donnie, I did want to say, Ms. Bruce, that I can say that you excelled with all of those things. I know I had a couple of your classes during virtual learning, and it was really great to understand that you were trying to make connections with the students. And I personally did make a connection with you. And I can say that for both of the classes that I had with you, it made it so much better. So I think that the things that you were doing really helped.
And I just want to add to Sierra, because I know I also had 2 classes with you during the pandemic. And I felt like you were actually the highlight of my classes, me wanting to go to classes, because the relationship that you kept with your students, but not just all of your students together, but individually. So you took time out of your space to make sure that each student was doing okay during the pandemic. Before you taught your lessons, you actually took time to make sure that they were able to talk about themselves and that you guys had a group conversation. So I really appreciate that. And I feel like, just to add on to that question, another way we could really increase student engagement or just motivate students that are discouraged is also to have conversations with the nurse or the mental health people within your building. And I actually that moves into the question I have for Nurse Hawkins, because I'm sure your job has shifted a lot just coming back to in-person learning. And you already had a lot on your plate before COVID. So I was just really want to hear more about your perspective on how COVID has shifted your focus and really your job.
Yes, COVID, yes, my job has shifted a lot. COVID has added a lot. I would say that I see an increase in more students struggling mental health. They spent a lot of time at home. Who knows what was going on there? And, you know, and just not having that human interaction, you know, our kids, they look different, you know, and, you know, it's, so for me, it has taken more of a, don't worry about the task that you have to do, worry about who's in front of you right now. And so, you know, the task, they'll be there, but the students, if they need me right now, that's where I'm at. That's where I have to be. And now with COVID and the extra job, you know, that I have, it definitely makes it a little bit harder. Luckily, I have a great leadership in Ms. Grayson who saw the need, and I have assistants now. So I can lend a little bit more time to students that are coming in my office and not just, you know, be focused on the task at hand. I can focus on those students, but COVID, and especially at the beginning of the year, I was by myself. And so it was doing my nursing job plus manning the isolation room and pulling from people who support staff who they're stretched thin as well. So it was a very hard thing to manage. And it's still a hard thing to manage. I will still say that most of my job is COVID, when I would rather be focusing on something else. But I feel like I'm trying to be more intentional with seeing who's walking in my door, as who they are and meeting them where they're at. And to me, I feel like that's where I will make my difference. You know, we just really, with this whole COVID thing, I think a lesson that we've learned is to take a step back and be in the moment, you know, and not worry about everything else. Because I will say myself, I've had some things happen during the pandemic, unexpected, and it's hard for me. And so I know exactly where a lot of people are. And so, you know, I'm just changing up the way I do things, and hopefully I'm meeting those needs. And if I'm not, please let me know.
Ms. Hawkins, what you said really stuck out to me. You were saying that a lot of the support and the leadership you are getting is from people within our building. So that kind of just leads me to the question, do you feel supported by district leadership? And I totally understand if you don't feel comfortable answering that question, but I just really needed to ask.
I will say, I feel like support could be better now. I will say that there's a nursing shortage. There was a shortage prior to the pandemic, and there's even more of a school nursing shortage now. And so leadership that I have are having to go out to schools and work there. And then also some of those leadership, the top leadership, we don't have anymore. They have moved on to other spaces. And so, so we're in transition. So definitely, I don't feel like we are as supported as we should be. And as someone had said earlier, we're all new to this, and so we're trying to navigate this. But I just feel like we really need to pay attention to what's going on at our level, and then take back that information and figure out what we're going to do with it. We just really need to take a step back and take a deep breath and just figure this out instead of keep pushing on, because we're glossing over what's going on instead of delving into what is really there.
And if I can add on quickly, I also just like to say that while many of us have been students at DMLK here for a long time, we really do appreciate the work that you do. And while, you know, obviously as students who may not, like, varying on the relationship they have with the faculty and in the district, we may not know everything that goes on behind the scenes, but I know that ever since I've been here in 6th grade and ever since all of us have been here, you're really a comforting face we see when we come into the building, when we see you in the hallways. And while it's very, very important that the district supports you in your position and everything that you do for our school, I feel like it's just important for our audience and for you to know that with everything going on in the pandemic, we appreciate you more now than ever. And it just really shows how dedicated you are to our school and our community.
Thank you.
And I to add on, Like, I think that having a Black nurse in a school specifically full of Black and Brown students is so inspiring, and it helps us get through our days and seeing that we have someone who can be so successful and so loving and so thoughtful when it comes to our needs and even puts our needs before themselves. Is such an amazing experience. And we just wanted to say that it's been great and we definitely love you being here.
Thank you. And I appreciate you guys saying you're going to make me cry.
I just want to say real quick, thank you for being so vulnerable with all of us. And I know in the building, when I go to your office or your place in the building, it's just really inspiring to be there. And I love the conversations I have with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
And with all that being said, one, I would really like to acknowledge that that's a really beautiful moment. And I really appreciate this podcast. And like Donnie was saying, the vulnerability in the situation and everybody saying the truth, because like you were saying, of people glossing over what's really happening, we're never going to be able to move forward. Like, if you don't plant a seed, the plant's not going to grow. So But I would also like to hear from you, Ms. Hawks. How do you feel in general and as far as being supported by the district?
Thank you, Janelle. A lot just kind of piggybacks on what Nurse Hawkins said and Dr. Lineman said about just, I don't feel like they knew or had a roadmap or something about knowing what to do. I do feel like for our department, for the social work and psychologist department, we do have resources available, and we do have people that we can reach out to. I feel like my biggest support is within DMLK. Again, we have one of the largest mental health team in the far Northeast, and I feel like I weigh heavily on the support there. I feel like it's there. I feel like district has, again, resources, and they've offered trainings and classes and things like that. But I feel like the main support that I feel supported is within our building. And it's because of our leadership there, and also because of the people that I work with. So it is hard when sometimes that the support isn't for, I would say, piggyback on kind of staff, when sometimes we are thrown just an EAP number. And I can tell you now that EAP is so far backed up that they don't even have openings. So when you think about like our own personal mental health, before we can actually be there for you all, making sure that we're okay, there is a backlog. And I feel like there is a need there, because as Nurse Hawkins says, we didn't come back the same either. So it's definitely hard to be there authentically for someone else.
Exactly. Like, you guys have been through so much and you're still here, you're still supporting us, and it's really appreciated. Like, we have the largest mental health team and it's still hard. Like, we need to acknowledge the mental health issues and the stress with students and staff. Like, there are so many different aspects that have affected student performance within schools. And we can address that. The fundamental part can be anxiety and depression caused by the hardships of the pandemic, affecting the social and emotional engagement tremendously.
You know, I'm glad you said that, Atalia. I was actually wondering, when the district decided to go back into in-person learning, do you think they even really thought about our mental health? Like, was our mental health really even a priority to them? And Karina, I would love if you could start off with this question. Do you think mental health was a priority?
I think coming back online and the district announcing that we were going back to school, I feel like mental health wasn't our priority, but to the teachers, I feel like they do really take our mental health into seriousness right now. Most of my teachers do really take turns picking students, taking them out of class, and asking them how they are doing. And they sometimes do let them have like their little breaks throughout the class, knowing that they can help them come back to the classes and pick up on their work. But due to the district, I feel like our mental health wasn't a priority to them.
I would just add that I don't think we all understood what mental health was in response to the pandemic. I think we had kind of this notation, mental health, resiliency, coming to school, getting your work done, passing graduation rates. And after the pandemic, it really highlighted kind of the continuum of what mental health was. And again, I don't know if we had a roadmap. I think that's a great question to ask. Was your mental health a priority? This year, I would say I learned the word of grace. I've heard people use it before. I've used it from time to time, but this is the year where I go, oh, grace. Like, you need to give people that time, that spread, the breath to process through what's going on. Each school has the opportunity to really think about, like, what does social emotional learning look like? I know that DPS made social emotional learning a transition priority, and kind of let every school pick what is best for your students. And I liked that model, because what's good in one school is not necessarily the best fit in another school. But it also inferred that we all knew what our kids needed, what our families needed, and what our schools needed. And so we tried to collect as much data as we could, but it almost felt like sometimes we missed the voice, which I think has been said here a number of times, of what do you need, which goes back to giving that time and space of where is your mental health and what do you need. I'm going to echo kind of what Cyndi and Felicia were saying in terms of resources. There aren't a lot of resources. That EAP number, you're right. Like, you can call and you're on a wait list. But it's not just EAP. I've been trying to find a COVID test all day long. I can't find one, right? So I keep going back to that roadmap. I don't know if we had a roadmap. I don't know if we're getting any better at building our roadmap, but we're trying. Right? We're trying. And I think your community is a great example of making sure that you have staff that are on site, and making sure that you're allocating time and money to the staff that can help support mental health, and working with your teachers. And Cyndi's absolutely spot on in terms of the people in your building are your best support. They're the ones who know you. They're the ones who have a similar experience, or who are most likely to have a similar experience. And there's a lot of strength and leaning on each other. We see it among our youth. I remember being a teenager. Sometimes I try to block it, but I can't get away from it. But I remember my friends were my people. And if I had a problem, I didn't go to an adult, went to my friends. And I think adults are the same way. Like, their colleagues are their people. They're the ones who can help lean in and say, here's kind of what's working for me, or here's what I heard about. And right now, and we're in a pandemic. Right now, we are leaning on each other more than ever. And I think that's the key to building that mental health, and that resilience, and that success, and that motivation that we got this. We can get through this. There's going to be hills and valleys, but it's going to take all of us. It's not just one, and it's not, a particular individual. I don't know if that's helpful, but kind of what I think.
That's definitely helpful. And there's so many things I agree with that you just said. And I honestly feel like it's really important also because, as it's been said multiple times before, we have one of the largest mental health teams in the district. And I feel like a lot of the people in our schools, for example, Ms. Hawks, they have a unique perspective, being able to talk to students and see how they're feeling right now, but also being adults and seeing, how this is really affecting everybody. And I think a big part of it also just comes with funding, and really looking at how the district is supporting our students and our staff at this time. So I want to ask you, Ms. Hawks, do you believe that the district provided sufficient mental health and safety resources to students during the pandemic? And looking back, what do you think they could have done better?
So I think that we were provided, again, a number of trainings and things like that. But again, it can always be better and be improved. But as we stated, we have such a cap on the resources, and we're so limited because there's such a higher need. And again, we are so fortunate to have, there's so many of us here at DMLK, but we are still tied to the nail to the tooth. We are still busy, and we are still there's an overflow. We have 2 therapists, they have waiting lists. So I think that taking each issue by by day, I mean, we're doing the best. We're doing interventions. We're doing signs of suicide preventions to try and to educate our students, to try and reach out to our parents. We've done an SOS for our parents, a signs of suicide for our parents, to just, again, educate and to, again, give out those resources. But again, I think that what we really need is just to kind of really just focus on, again, what we've been doing at DMLK, focusing on the relationship building, focusing on mental health, because if those basic needs aren't met, we can't reach the top. Okay, we can't learn if we're still struggling with our own personal mental health needs. So I think priority, again, revamping like we've been doing at DMLK or SEL is super important. That 30-minute class is huge. And that is to focus on the mental health, your needs, to kind of give everyone what they're missing out from day to day. So although it's 30 minutes, I feel like that is another, I feel like that's huge. But again, just more resources like that, just having more, I think it's so hard to say, because we continue to say we need resources, we need supports, but then it's like, well, what does that look like? And I think it's just starting from the bottom and just really finally just what we're doing now is this podcast and really putting it out there that we are not okay. And that's okay. So once we normalize that, I think that we can then start there and then apply. Here's a resource, here's a piece of paper, but then getting to the real root of the problem. What is the problem? And meeting people where they're at, and that's staff too.
And I really would just like to piggyback off of what you were saying about SEL classes. Like, I know when we were talking about this podcast and we were just brainstorming, we really pinpointed like how important SEL is really going to be. So we'd say SEL, and then we were like, what does that stand for? Because we really didn't even know what it stood for, and figured out it was social emotional learning. And the main thing that we were talking about is like how we're unable to connect, how a lot of trauma is putting up walls like between each other, because there's a lot of like underlying mistrust between people, and just a lot of things going on in each individual's head and each person's experience within our community. I know that a lot of students that I know personally have been going through having to grieve somebody to suicide. And I know that that's a big topic, obviously centering within mental health. And I would like to ask Dr. Lineman, as the student safety coordinator, we know that you focus on suicide and threat assessments for the districts. And when we experience a student loss, you coordinate the crisis team to come to the school and help students and faculty. So I would like to ask you, as a result, have you seen an increase in suicide and threat assessments this year?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that last year we saw a significant decrease. Last year we saw a significant, because we weren't working with kids, right? We didn't have you in our rooms. We didn't get to talk to our adolescents and our teens and our youth around how they were feeling. And I think that was shared earlier in terms of like there was difficulty building connection and having the time and space to talk with each of the kids and youth that might have needed some more support. So last year we saw a significant decrease. This year numbers have gone back up, but don't appear to be significantly different from years prior when we weren't experiencing a pandemic. So I think we're getting better at identifying like when there's needs and how to respond, but those numbers don't appear to be significantly higher than prior years. And I think it's also important to note every, geographic area across the Denver metro or the US is experiencing something, right? And it feels big, and it probably is big, especially in terms of what the impact is to that community. But I'm going to echo kind of what Ms. Hawks had said earlier. Our schools are great at doing prevention programming. They are doing their signs of suicide in their 6th and 9th grade classes. They're doing Riding the Waves in our 5th grade classes, doing Safe to Tell programming. This year, we extended our programming to our 11th and 12th grade classes using a couple of different programs just to continue that conversation and make sure that our youth have the skills. Because as you shared, and I think it was Karina that was kind of speaking a little bit to it, we're about to step out into the world as young adults, and it looks different. And I think a lot of our teens got a little bit of familiarity of what that looked like during the pandemic when they were on remote, and they were, filling all those different roles of caregivers and co-parenting, and how it felt like a different job. The whole time we've been talking today, I just keep thinking about code switching and how we keep, trying on a different hat, and this pandemic keeps making me try on different hats. But I am happy to say that, suicide continues to be a significant concern in Colorado, but we have not seen an increase in loss by suicide in Colorado during the pandemic. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, that we can continue to build up some of that prevention and help people feel safe and supported. Hopefully that answers your question.
I'm really glad that suicide rates have gone down during the pandemic, but as you have mentioned, they are starting to rise again, or they're starting to get back on the level that they used to be. But I feel like it's not only suicide, but it's also an increase in depression that students have developed just throughout the pandemic and actually coming back to in-person learning. And that has a lot to do with our mental health and how it has played a big role, and also the importance of social emotional learning within our school, and it's also as a district priority. So can you talk to us a little more about why this is a district priority and what this should look like in schools?
I think that's a great question that I might not have a magic answer for. Kim Price, actually within our district, oversees a lot of our social emotional learning initiatives. Should be a great person for you to reach out and ask that question to. I also want to make a point to share that we're seeing an increase, but some of that increase that we're seeing is drug related. So I think it's really important to highlight the need for substance abuse prevention and intervention services in schools, as well as in our communities. And also that some of those trend rates of where we're seeing an increase in loss by suicide is happening among that 18 to 23 population, which is our youth who are graduating, our youth who are transitioning to that next setting, and a lot of things change. And you had kind of highlighted a little bit of that, those feelings of anxiety and depression that often can occur when we feel disconnected. And I think it was said earlier today, like remote learning, it almost gave us permission to disconnect, permission to not be connected to our students, to our peers, to our staff, to our families almost. I heard from a lot of youth who said, I just kind of held up in my bedroom, and that's not good. Right? Like none of us want to feel disconnected. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I did want to make sure to point out that some of what we're seeing is youth who are graduating and not knowing what comes next. So we're trying to work on building up those skills.
I can, as a youth that just graduated, I can definitely speak to that a little bit. And I feel like it just has to do with not really knowing where our place is in the world, because everybody else is trying to figure out what they're doing. And I can definitely say that COVID did force us to grow up really fast. And it kind of sucks when it's a lot of, at least family members will tell you why are you trying to grow up so fast and blah, blah, blah. But I'm literally, I don't think any of us really wanted to, be thrown out into the world just like that, because it has been really difficult. But I do want to say that, at least for me personally, I would like to highlight the strength that it's really taking in our communities to continue to push forward and through this, because like you said, there wasn't a significant increase in suicide rates. So it really does show we are able to very much push through hardship in a really respectable way, I think, all of us.
I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it also highlights that we're all having our own big emotions. Even I'm having my own big emotions during this pandemic and trying to figure out how to support people and support myself too. But we have a big population of individuals who are finding success. We do have students that are being able to, get back on track and build relationships, whether it be in their current school community or a new school community. I mean, look at this group of individuals. Look at how powerful this group of individuals are in terms of how they're feeling connected. They're supporting each other. And even, the youth group within this community, you're continuing that conversation and that message. So while it feels big and it feels heavy for all of us in different ways, there still is that light and that hope of resilience that we keep seeing pop up. And I think that speaks to the strength of our school communities and our district as a whole.
I definitely agree. I'm actually glad that you guys brought up the point of how students going into the world, students have graduated. There is a really big pressure to prepare yourself for society, prepare yourself for the world we live in today. And I feel like the process of adjusting students and teachers to virtual learning was a struggle in itself, especially for the students who are still in virtual learning or coming out of it and readjusting to going back to school. And the presence of COVID and social issues didn't make it any easier. And just to switch topics here a little bit, I know the Black Lives Matter movement reemerged after the police killing of George Floyd, alongside other anti-Black hate crimes last summer, or actually this summer as well. And while the video of the officer with his knee to George Floyd's neck was disgusting enough to be disgusting and cause widespread outrage to everybody, I felt like it was especially harmful to Black people. I mean, it's one of the reasons we started this podcast. And as police brutality has always been an issue facing our community, for Black students and educators, it's really hard to come to school and participate when all you see in the world are examples that suggest your life is not valued or seen as equal to others. So I guess I just want to ask you, Dr. Lineman, as you're about to be getting off soon, what effects do you think police brutality and other just injustices within the world, specifically racial injustices during the pandemic, had on our students and educators?
That's a good question, and that's a big question. That's a big question that depends on each individual's experience of how, they processed the information they were seeing. They're experiencing their own individual experiences within their communities, within their schools, within their families. But I think it's not disagreeable to say that it's impactful. It makes people feel unsafe. It makes them feel disconnected. It makes them question, am I making a meaningful impact? Does anyone hear me? Am I valued? And I think that it makes people feel kind of questioning, who am I and what is this world that I'm sitting in? And is this the world I want to sit in? So I think it's just impactful to everyone, but just in a different way, depending on where you're at and your reflections and your own prior experiences. Some people have had more exposure to trauma than others. And some people have had the direct experience of discrimination or harassment that can, cause them to pause and think differently about who they are and how they're helping to make this world a better place. So it's not an easy answer and it's not a simple answer, but I think it depends on the individual, and part of the power of the individual experience is what you do with that experience and how you create change to make sure that others do feel valued and feel safe.
What effects do you think police brutality and other racial injustices during the pandemic had on students and educators? And I think I'll have you answer that first, Ms. Hawkins.
Thank you. I think that it put a lot of anger in people. And I think that some of the effects is people are definitely on edge, kind of not knowing or going where they're coming. I think it brought a lot to light. We have students that are very much triggered. Even an incident of a student of take your hood off, it's triggering. And I see like a lot of our students are being triggered just from normal conversations or what used to be normal because of everything that has happened. It puts a lot of people on edge. I think that it brought a lot to light. I think that now with everything that has happened, students are able to really express themselves, and it's not giving them an excuse to act a certain way, but I think people are now seeing the why instead of this is the reason. But I think that a lot of people are seeing, okay, this is why this happens. So I think that it's opening up a lot of different people's eyes, and it's changing. You can see just from talking to someone of color how on edge they are. If someone who is not of color has a conversation or says one thing, how triggering it can be to that particular student. So I think that it has impacted us in so many different ways. But I think that what really comes to mind for me is what I see is anger, a lot of anger and unprocessed anger.
I'm going to chime in. I agree, Cyndi. I think that especially for our young Black males, it has made them question their worth. But it also, too, there is anger there. And as well, I feel like now, yes, they're on edge, and now they have to assert themselves even more, just so that they can say, I'm here, see me. I'm not just, something to just throw away or whatever. We just really need to, this social injustice, we really need to sit down and talk about it. And I think it has also given us an opportunity to, work through, those problems, maybe even asking more questions as to why it happened and what can be done better. Our society really needs to, and which I feel like we're moving that direction. And with the youth of today, you guys ask questions and do things that we didn't do in the past. And so it is putting things to the forefront of, okay, yeah, that was wrong. Tell me why it was wrong and what we need to do to change it. You guys are demanding that. And I really can appreciate that because your mindsets are different. And so I would encourage you to continue on doing that. And of course, this is why you created the podcast, is because of the injustices. And so, yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. And we need to get more voices too of our young Black males so that we can figure out what it is they're feeling, so we can help them navigate and work through that as well.
I'd like to jump on and add to that as a teacher. So I'm a social studies teacher, I teach government. And so it's important to address dysfunction in government. And the issue I've had, though, is that I see different layers of responses from students. And so there's a layer of students who have high intensity over police brutality. They want to talk about it. They want to talk about what's wrong. They want to express their anger. They want to talk about solutions. So that's kind of where I'm at. However, I need to acknowledge that there's another layer. There's a whole other layer of students who are weary about this. They're angry, but they're tired of it. And so there's a lack of agency. They don't feel like they can be agents in the issue. There's a lack of energy about it because they just don't want to talk about it anymore. So as a teacher, I need to be sensitive to that. And then there's a whole other layer of people who avoid. They avoid talking about it and just check out. And so it's difficult from an educational standpoint of talking to young adults about police brutality. It's really tough.
I would like to say, I think maybe that might just be because like it's happening so often, and like you look around, and I know some students may be getting desensitized to it, but they still notice that like still makes them angry whenever they see it. And then they also feel insignificant, like there's not much they can do about it. They feel like a lot of like systems are bigger than them. But with that being said, I would like to like kind of jump back to the beginning of the conversation with what you were saying about like affirming students, because now, we're kind of moving to the end of the episode and we're going to be moving to the call to action. But like, I'd really want to highlight what you were saying about, letting them know every single day, even if it's tedious, it's really important and it's really significant, because like the things that we hear every day are the things that we start to believe, and the things that we see are also things that we believe. So it's like, who's taking the time to help us see and believe things that are positive, things that affirm us, things that affirm a successful future for us, things that affirm the fact that Black Lives Matter, and the fact that it's not just a trend, and the fact that we're not just waiting for another news break to bring it back up. But yeah, with that being said, I would like to say that it seems, well, we know everything has changed, and it seems that everything has changed besides education. COVID is forcing us to reevaluate our lives daily. So I think that we need to begin reevaluating education.
I agree. We do need to reevaluate education from the top level up. And what our legislators, we need to start talking to them about funding, because a lot of it is the reason why we're not getting a lot of the stuff that we need. There's no money there, and so whoever it is that are helping to make these laws and decisions about funding, that's who we need to be talking to as well, so that we can get the resources and things that we need in our public schools to make them better. Everyone deserves an education and a great education, whether it be public or private. And we need to really, focus on that. And that's where things will, I think, start to change, is talking to the people who are actually making the decisions and the laws, and divvying out the funding and stuff that comes our way. We need more of it. I think they know we need more of it, but we need to shake some things up and make it more a priority than just, sitting on it.
I definitely agree with you. And 2020 has been a huge change here. So let's focus on what we can do moving forward. And knowing that we need to give students who look like us opportunities to positively reimagine our futures, what can we do? And Karina, as a student, I would like to start off with you. What's your take?
I feel like what we can do is support everyone, not just like equally supporting, but support people as much as you can, because it doesn't matter if you don't know what they're going through or something. If you don't know them, you should always support them no matter what, because it can surprise you of how many things they can succeed in it, no matter what mental state they're in right now.
I definitely agree with you and love what you really said, because it's really important, like just breaking down back to the basics of supporting one another, really building friendships or relationships from the basics to support, so we can have that trust and want to communicate and be excited to see each other. Like, especially with teachers, so many students are really excited to come see you and excited to come talk to you, not just teachers, but all the staff in the building. So you really hit the nail on the head.
I just want to add kind of what Janelle said, but I think one thing we can really do is focus more on education, and not only education, but also communication with education. So make sure that you are actually communicating with your students if you're a teacher, and if a student is communicating with the teacher, they need to work on communication better, and just mental health in general. And really, everybody just needs to focus on communication.
Okay. Well, this conversation today was honestly great, hearing from so many different outlooks, so many different viewpoints. I'm sure we've all heard things that brought some type of recognition and some things that we didn't even think about in the first place. So we would like to thank you all for coming on The Take today. And we were more than honored to have had you on this episode. We're very appreciative of the knowledge and perspective you have shared with our audience. On today's episode, we talked about how COVID has had a negative effect on everyone in many aspects, but especially people of color, where the death rates have increased due to COVID-19. These issues across the countries affect our performance in our day-to-day lives, and we need to be moving accordingly. With that being said, it is clear that we need to reinvent and reimagine education for the good of students, and so that together we may return from an interrelated experience well prepared to do our best in an educational environment. Here's our call to action. We ask that there is a direct focus on our educational environments now and not what it used to be, so that we can make beneficial improvements. We need our district to do a better job at preparing our students and staff. We can teach. How can teachers teach with a sense of urgency when they weren't prepared? How can teachers take care of students when they're not being taken care of? Us students want to learn, but we need to be fixed too. Engagement looks different. Education looks different, and therefore our district needs to be different. So we invite district leaders into our building to spend a week engaging with staff and students. We have district leaders making decisions on our learning experience while they're at home, they're on Zoom, and they're far removed. There has to be new strategies in order to improve the engagement of students. And that means decision makers need to be on the front line and not online. Because in order for successful change, you need to see how these buildings are functioning for yourselves. It is our desire that students, teachers, and staff receive help for their constructive needs, whether it's funding, trauma social workers, training, and so on. We have to make sure the social and emotional learning classes are effectively being used so that it is not an underlying waste of time, and so that teachers are helping students on a personal level and not just an academic one. And DMLK has 3 social workers, and we're struggling with that. So ensuring that schools have wraparound services for staff and students coming back with trauma is a must. And even if every school doesn't have wraparound services, what's Plan B? There has to be an alternative if it is a priority. And if equity is the core of your mission, who's taking the action steps to empathize and liberate? Who's taking the physical steps into our buildings to look into the eyes of our children and understand where we're at and where we want to be? There needs to be some sort of report card for the district underlining what they are doing to best benefit their students and support their staff members to do the same. And why isn't baseline data not a requirement for students? In order to reimagine schools, we can no longer have siloed leaders address these issues the same way they have in the past. In order to move forward, districts must prioritize effective collaboration that focuses on students' well-being and not just their academics.
And with that being said, if you enjoyed today's take, make sure to tune in with our next episode called Who's to Blame, where we will be talking about the history and differences between integrated and segregated education.
And you could also follow us on our Facebook page, No Justice, No Peace, The Take, and email us at kjkpthetake@gmail.com. Make sure to also subscribe to our YouTube channel, No Justice, No Peace, The Take.
Black is beautiful. Yes, it is. Black is beautiful. Black is beautiful. Yes, it is. Black is beautiful. You can say that I'm clearly comfortable up in my own skin. This one's for the melanin. This one's for the melanin. Everyone who wants the elements of the relevant. Stand up, stand up. Put your fist in the air if you're feeling the anthem.
Now ain't nobody being biased, I'm just stating facts. When I think about greatness, it goes back to black. I think about all the pain our people went through. The history was wiped out. Our people built America.